Every single day you're surrounded by liars. And the worst part, you believe them. Think about it. How many times this week did someone smile while planning against you? How many conversations felt slightly off, but you ignored that instinct because you wanted to trust them? That hesitation, that moment where you dismiss your gut feeling is costing you power, opportunities, and respect. While you're choosing to believe their words, they're already 3 steps ahead, using your trust as a weapon against you. In this video, I'll reveal Machiavelli's 5 signals that expose deception instantly. These aren't just body language tricks. These are psychological patterns rooted in human nature, patterns that liars cannot hide, no matter how practiced they are. By the end, you'll see through anyone who attempts to manipulate you. But I must warn you, once you see these signals, you can never unsee them. Niccolò Machiavelli understood something that modern society desperately tries to hide. Deception is the foundation of all human interaction. Not some of it, all of it. In 15th century Florence, Machiavelli served as a diplomat, observing princes, merchants, and soldiers negotiate, ally, and betray each other. He watched men smile during treaty signings, only to send assassins that same night. He witnessed entire families destroyed because one person failed to detect a single lie during a critical conversation. What Machiavelli discovered changed everything. Lies follow predictable patterns. The human brain, when constructing false reality, leaves fingerprints. Not obvious ones, subtle distortions in behavior that only the trained observer can detect. Modern culture teaches you to ignore these signals. You're told to give people the benefit of the doubt, to trust until proven otherwise, to believe that questioning someone's honesty makes you paranoid or cynical. This programming serves one purpose: to keep you vulnerable. The uncomfortable truth is that most people lie constantly. Studies show the average person lies anywhere from 10 to 200 times per day, depending on how you define deception. White lies, omissions, exaggerations, strategic misdirection. It's all the same mechanism. And the people who master deception rise to the top of every social hierarchy, while the honest remain exploited. But there's something even darker about this. The best liars aren't sociopaths or criminals. They're the people closest to you: colleagues, friends, even family members. People who've learned that manipulation is easier than merit, that deception pays better than authenticity. Machiavelli didn't teach these principles to help people lie better. He taught them so the wise could protect themselves. Because in his world and in yours, the penalty for blindness is destruction. Now, let's reveal the 5 signals that expose every liar, no matter how skilled. Principle 1. The detail reversal. The first signal is what I call the detail reversal, and it's the fastest way to catch someone in a lie. Here's how it works. When someone tells you the truth, they can recall events naturally, in any order. Ask them to start from the middle, the end, or zoom into a specific moment. Their memory flows freely because they actually experienced it. But when someone lies, they construct a narrative. They rehearse it in chronological order, building a logical sequence that sounds believable. This constructed story lives in their prefrontal cortex, the planning center of the brain, not in their experiential memory. The moment you ask them to recall the story in reverse order or jump to a detail out of sequence, their cognitive load spikes. The brain cannot efficiently access constructed narratives backward. You'll see hesitation, increased speech errors, and often completely different details than they provided moments before. Let me give you a concrete example. In corporate environments, this happens constantly. Imagine a colleague explaining why they missed a deadline. They deliver a smooth story: traffic problems, unexpected client call, computer issues, all perfectly timed, perfectly reasonable. Most people accept this and move on. But Machiavelli's student does something different. They wait 5 minutes, then casually reference a detail from the middle of the story. By the way, what time did that client call come in? The liar's brain now has to reconstruct the entire false timeline to answer one question. Watch their eyes. Listen for verbal fillers. So, actually. Notice if the detail changes slightly. The psychological mechanism is elegant. Truth is encoded as experience, multi-sensory, emotional, contextual. Lies are encoded as narrative, linguistic, sequential, logical. The human brain stores these in fundamentally different systems. When you force someone to access their story non-linearly, you're exploiting the difference between these storage mechanisms. This is why police investigators and intelligence officers use the cognitive interview technique. They deliberately ask witnesses to recall events backward, from end to beginning. Truthful witnesses can do this. Deceptive ones cannot, at least not without visible cognitive strain. In your daily life, you don't need to be aggressive about this. Simply reference details out of order during conversation. Circle back to earlier claims with curiosity, not accusation. The liar reveals themselves through inconsistency and mental effort that honest people simply don't display. Now, most people stop here. They learn one signal and think they've mastered deception detection, but that's exactly why they still get manipulated. There's a second layer one that operates below conscious awareness, where the liar has no control. Principi T2, micro-expression leakage. The second signal is micro-expression leakage, and this is where dark psychology becomes truly dangerous. Your face contains 43 muscles controlled by thousands of neural pathways. When you experience genuine emotion, these muscles activate in precise, coordinated patterns that last between half a second to 2 seconds. This is a normal expression, the smile that reaches the eyes, the frown that furrows the brow naturally. But micro-expressions are different. They last between 1/15th and 1/5 of a second, literally faster than conscious perception. These are involuntary emotional responses that flash across the face before the person's conscious mind suppresses them with a false expression. Machiavelli never had access to modern neuroscience, but he observed this phenomenon instinctively. In The Prince, he warned that men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that deceivers will always find victims unless you learn to see beyond the mask they present. The reason micro-expressions matter is simple. You cannot fake them, and you cannot suppress them. They originate in the limbic system, the ancient emotional core of your brain that evolved millions of years before language, before deception, before conscious thought. When someone feels contempt but displays agreement, that flash of contempt will leak through for a fraction of a second before their cortex masks it with a smile. Here's where it gets darker. Most people never see these expressions because they're focused on words. You're listening to what someone says, processing their logical argument, evaluating their tone. Meanwhile, their face is betraying them 7 times per minute, and you miss every single signal. The most common micro-expressions to watch for during deception are contempt, fear, and anger. Contempt appears as a unilateral lip corner raised one side of the mouth curls upward in a subtle sneer. This is the expression of superiority, of hidden disrespect. When someone says they respect your opinion, but flashes contempt for 1/10 of a second, you've just seen their truth. Fear manifests as raised upper eyelids and slightly opened mouth. When someone lies about something that could expose them, their amygdala activates a fear response before they consciously suppress it. That flash of fear tells you they worried about being caught. Anger shows through lowered brows and tightened lips. When someone claims to be fine with your decision, but flashes anger, you're seeing their genuine emotional state before social conditioning reimposed the mask. Let me tell you about a negotiation I observed between 2 business partners. One partner proposed a deal restructuring, the other verbally agreed, saying it sounds fair and he'd need to review details but was generally supportive. Standard corporate language, cautious but positive. But in the 2 seconds after he said, sounds fair, 3 micro-expressions leak through: contempt, anger, and disgust. Each lasted less than a quarter second. His conscious mind performed perfectly, but his limbic system revealed the truth. He felt betrayed, disrespected, and was already planning to undermine the deal. 6 weeks later, that's exactly what happened. The details he needed to review became endless obstacles. The general support transformed into systematic resistance. But none of this surprised the observant person who saw those 3 micro-expressions and understood their meaning. The power dynamics here are critical. In every interaction, there's a surface level, the socially acceptable performance both parties execute. And there's a shadow level, the genuine emotions, intentions, and reactions that leak through despite conscious control. The masses live entirely on the surface level. They take words at face value, trust verbal commitments, believe stated intentions. But those who understand Machiavelli's principles operate on both levels simultaneously. They hear your words while watching your face. They accept your agreement while noting your contempt. They smile back at you while cataloging every micro-expression that revealed your true position. If you're still watching this, you're already ahead of 90% who clicked away, because this level of awareness makes them uncomfortable. They prefer the illusion of trust to the reality of human nature. The next principle is where it gets truly dangerous, because it reveals not just that someone is lying, but exactly what they're lying about. Principle 3. Baseline deviation. Spikes. The third signal is baseline deviation spikes, and this is what separates amateurs from masters of deception detection. Here's the critical insight. Everyone has a baseline, a unique pattern of behavior, speech, and mannerisms that represents their normal state. Some people naturally speak quickly, others gesture constantly. Some make intense eye contact, others prefer to glance away periodically. None of these behaviors by themselves indicate deception. The person who avoids eye contact might simply be introverted or culturally conditioned differently. The person who speaks rapidly might have an anxious temperament. This is why most people fail at detecting lies. They look for universal signals that don't exist. They've heard liars don't make eye contact or liars touch their face, so they watch for these behaviors in everyone. But these rules are useless without context. Machiavelli understood this instinctively. He didn't evaluate people against abstract standards. He observed each individual's natural patterns first, then watched for deviations when specific topics arose. The technique is elegant: establish baseline, then probe for deviation. When you first interact with someone, observe them during neutral conversation. Talk about weather, shared interests, non-threatening topics. Watch how they naturally move, speak, and express themselves. This is their baseline, their authentic behavioral signature, when they have no reason to deceive. Now introduce the topic where you suspect deception. Watch what changes. Not absolute behaviors, but deviations from their established baseline. The person who naturally maintains strong eye contact suddenly looks away when discussing a specific project. That's a deviation spike. The person who speaks fluidly suddenly injects verbal fillers, like, you know, when explaining where they were last night. Deviation spike. The person who sits calmly suddenly shifts posture, adjusts clothing, or engages in self-soothing behaviors when a particular subject arises. Deviation spike. These spikes occur because lying creates cognitive load, mental effort that didn't exist during baseline conversation. The brain is simultaneously constructing false narrative, suppressing true information, monitoring your reactions, and maintaining plausible performance. This cognitive burden disrupts normal behavioral patterns. Let me contrast two scenarios to make this concrete. Weak people learn one deception signal and apply it universally. They meet someone who naturally fidgets and conclude they're dishonest. They encounter someone with poor eye contact and label them a liar. This approach fails constantly because it ignores individual baselines. Powerful people operate differently. They spend the first 10 minutes of any important conversation establishing baseline. They ask easy questions, discuss comfortable topics, observe natural patterns. Then, when they shift to critical subjects, they watch for specific deviations from that established baseline. Here's a real application: job interviews. When you interview someone, start with neutral questions about their background, interests, previous roles. Watch how they naturally communicate. Do they maintain eye contact? How do they use their hands? What's their speech rhythm? Then ask about the specific claim on their resume you need to verify. Tell me about that project where you increased revenue by 40%. If their entire behavioral pattern suddenly shifts: less eye contact, more hesitation, different vocal quality, you've identified a deviation spike at exactly the moment they discussed a potentially fabricated achievement. This is where you need to be careful though. One deviation doesn't confirm deception. Stress, personal issues, or simply the importance of the topic can cause behavioral changes. You're looking for clusters, multiple deviations that all spike when a specific subject arises, then return to baseline when you shift topics. Advanced practitioners take this further. They deliberately return to neutral topics after triggering a deviation spike, watching to see if the person's behavior returns to baseline. Then they reintroduce the sensitive topic from a different angle, observing whether the deviation pattern repeats. Consistent deviation clustering around specific content with returns to baseline during neutral conversation provides near certainty of deception regarding that particular subject. The power dynamics here are profound. When you master baseline deviation detection, you know not only that someone is lying, but exactly what they're lying about. You can map the territory of their deception with precision. These topics are truthful. This one triggers deviation. This other one causes maximum cognitive load. This intelligence allows you to strategically apply pressure, ask follow-up questions, or simply catalog the information for future use. You never reveal what you know. You simply smile, nod, and make note of exactly where their mask slipped. But knowing these three principles isn't enough. You need to understand how they combine with something even more powerful, something most people miss entirely because they're too focused on detecting lies instead of understanding why people lie in the first place. Principle 4, the overcompensation tell. The fourth signal is the overcompensation tell, and this exposes the deepest level of deception, the lie the person is telling themselves. Here's what most people don't understand. The best liars believe their own lies. They've repeated the false narrative so many times that parts of it have integrated into their identity. This makes them far more dangerous than conscious deceivers because they display fewer traditional deception signals. But there's a crack in this armor, and Machiavelli identified it 5 centuries ago. When people lie about something that threatens their self-image, they overcompensate. They don't just state their false claim, they reinforce it with excessive detail, unnecessary emphasis, and defensive framing that truthful people never use. The mechanism is psychological projection. The liar feels internal doubt about their deception. This doubt creates anxiety. To suppress that anxiety, they externally project certainty, not normal certainty, but exaggerated, forceful, aggressive certainty that far exceeds what the situation requires. Listen for these linguistic patterns. To be completely honest with you, why does honesty need qualification? Truthful people simply state facts. They don't announce their honesty. I swear on my mother's life. Excessive oath-taking signals internal doubt requiring external validation. Why would I lie about that? Defensive framing before you've even questioned them. Everyone knows, or obviously, appealing to consensus or self-evidence to avoid providing actual evidence. These phrases are verbal armor, desperate attempts to fortify a weak position. The person isn't just lying to you, they're trying to convince themselves through performative certainty. But the overcompensation extends beyond language into behavior. Watch for excessive detail provision. When you ask what they did yesterday and they provide a minute-by-minute account without prompting, they're overcompensating. Truthful responses are proportional to the question. Aggressive defensiveness, the person who responds to mild curiosity with intense justification, reveals their internal fragility about the topic. Reputation insurance. Constantly referencing their integrity, honesty, or moral character without anyone questioning it. Let me show you how this operates in high-stakes environments. Consider corporate fraud. When executives lie about financial performance, they don't simply misstate numbers. They surround those numbers with elaborate narratives about market conditions, competitor actions, unexpected variables, layers of context that transform simple lies into complex stories. Why? Because they need to believe the lie themselves. They need to construct a reality where their deception becomes justified, necessary, even heroic. This psychological need creates overcompensation tells throughout their communication. The most revealing case was a CEO explaining quarterly losses. A truthful executive would say, revenue declined by 12% due to reduced consumer spending in our primary market. Direct, proportional, factual. But the CEO said, look, everyone knows the market has been incredibly challenging. Our competitors are facing the same headwinds. Honestly, when you consider all the variables, the economic uncertainty, the supply chain disruptions that no one could have predicted, to be completely transparent with you, we're actually performing better than most analysts expected given the circumstances. Notice the overcompensation cascade, consensus appeal, everyone knows, comparison to others, qualification of honesty, excessive detail about external factors, defensive framing about transparency. None of this was necessary if the explanation was truthful. All of it was required to maintain his own belief in the false narrative. And here's what Machiavelli never explicitly wrote, but clearly understood. The overcompensation tell reveals the lie the person desperately needs you to believe, because they desperately need to believe it themselves. This makes it the most dangerous signal to detect, because it exposes not just conscious deception, but unconscious self-deception. The person who overcompensates isn't just trying to fool you. They're trying to avoid confronting their own moral compromise, their own failure, their own shame. When you identify this pattern, you're seeing straight through to someone's psychological wound, the place where their self-image cracks and they have to frantically repair it with performance. In practical terms, this gives you enormous strategic advantage. You know exactly what topics threaten their identity. You know which claims they're most vulnerable about. You can apply pressure to these psychological fault lines, or more often, simply avoid trusting anything they say regarding these specific areas. The power dynamic shifts completely once you master this. You're no longer evaluating surface claims. You're reading psychological maps of insecurity, identifying exactly where each person's mask is weakest, cataloging their vulnerabilities for future reference. This is the level where most people cannot operate. It requires you to see humans not as individuals with intrinsic honesty, but as strategic actors managing competing internal narratives, where truth becomes just one option among many for maintaining psychological stability. Principle 5. Integration, the Machiavellian framework. Now you understand the 5 signals individually, but knowledge without integration is useless. Machiavelli's genius wasn't identifying isolated tactics. It was recognizing how all elements of power dynamics operate as a system. Deception detection works the same way. Here's the framework. First, use detail reversal to test narrative consistency. Ask questions out of sequence. Reference earlier claims at unexpected moments. Force the person's brain to access their story non-linearly. Second, while they're answering, watch for micro-expression leakage. Their words might maintain the performance, but their face will reveal emotional truth, contempt, fear, anger in fractions of a second. Third, compare their current behavior to their baseline. You're not looking for universal deception signals. You're identifying deviations specific to this individual when discussing particular topics. Fourth, listen for overcompensation. Tells in their language and behavior. Excessive detail, unnecessary oaths, defensive framing all reveal internal doubt about the narrative they're projecting. Fifth, and most critically, the cluster principle. One signal might be coincidence, 2 could be stress. But when all 5 signals align around a specific topic, you have near certainty of deception regarding that subject. This systematic approach transforms you from someone who has a feeling about dishonesty into someone who knows with precision when, where, and about what someone is lying. Now, some will say this is manipulation, that this level of scrutiny is paranoid or cynical, but power doesn't care about labels. The world is already full of people using these deception techniques against you. Your only choice is whether you'll develop the counter-skill or remain vulnerable. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. I'll add to that, it is better to see clearly than to be comfortable if you cannot achieve both. The reality is brutal but simple. Human interaction is strategic. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every relationship contains elements of performance. The masses pretend otherwise because that pretense makes life comfortable. But comfort is the enemy of power. The question isn't whether you should develop these skills. The world has already decided that for you by surrounding you with people who deceive strategically while you continue to trust blindly. The question is whether you'll remain a piece on someone else's board or become a player in your own right. You now possess knowledge that 99% of people will never understand. But knowledge without application is worthless. Here's exactly how to implement this starting today. Step 1. Baseline establishment. In your next 3 important conversations, spend the first 5 minutes establishing baseline. Ask neutral questions. Observe natural behaviors. Make mental notes or physical notes later about speech patterns, eye contact, gestures, and vocal quality. Step 2. Detail reversal practice. During any story someone tells you this week, wait a few minutes, then casually reference a detail out of sequence. Wait, what time did you say that happened? Watch their response. Notice whether they answer fluidly or need to reconstruct. Step 3. Micro-expression training. Search for micro-expression training resources. Spend 15 minutes daily learning to recognize contempt, fear, and anger in facial expressions. This is a learnable skill that compounds rapidly with practice. Step 4. Overcompensation awareness. Start cataloging qualifying phrases in others' speech. Notice when people say honestly, to be transparent, or everyone knows. You'll be shocked how often these appear in deceptive communication once you start listening for them. Step 5. The integration test. In one high-stakes situation, this month a negotiation, important meeting, or critical conversation, apply all 5 principles simultaneously. Establish baseline. Probe with detail reversal. Watch for micro-expressions. Note deviations, and listen for overcompensation. Then compare your assessment to outcomes. This is how you calibrate your detection system. The progression is deliberate. You start with individual skills, practice them in low-stakes environments, then integrate them when it truly matters. This isn't about becoming paranoid. It's about becoming calibrated, seeing reality instead of the performance people present. Most people will watch this video and do nothing. That's why they remain powerless, repeatedly exploited by those who understand these dynamics. You now have a choice that most never get, to operate with clarity in a world built on deception. We've covered Machiavelli's 5 signals that expose deception: detail reversal, micro-expression leakage, baseline deviation spikes, overcompensation tells, and the integration framework that makes them operational. You now possess what Machiavelli spent decades in political courts observing, what intelligence agencies spend millions training operatives to recognize, what separates the powerful from the exploited in every social hierarchy. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people will watch this and do nothing. They'll feel momentarily enlightened, then return to their default mode of blind trust and comfortable ignorance. That's why they continue to be manipulated, lied to, and outmaneuvered. The world is divided into players and pieces. Players understand the game and act strategically. Pieces believe the game doesn't exist and wonder why they keep losing. This video gave you the rulebook. Whether you become a player or remain a piece is entirely your choice. If this resonates with the part of you that's tired of being deceived, that's ready to see clearly instead of comfortably, then you know what to do. Subscribe to this channel. This isn't content for comfort. It's intelligence for power. In future videos, we'll go deeper. How to use these same principles to construct undetectable deception of your own. How to manipulate without triggering these signals. How to operate at the highest levels of strategic interaction where everyone knows everyone is performing and the game becomes about whose performance is superior. But that's only for those who choose to see. The choice is yours. But remember this, ignorance is not bliss. It's slavery. Now you know what they're hiding. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?